All right. So, Joe, why don't we kick things off with you sharing a bit about yourself and your career story?
Definitely. Good afternoon, everybody. At least afternoon here. I know some of you might not be calling in from the San Francisco Bay Area. I am calling in from there. I'm actually calling in from Oakland. Um, as Heidi mentioned, I am super excited to be here with you all. My name is Joham Silvestre. My preferred gender pronouns are he, him, and his. You can also use they and them if you'd like. I am now getting to my 10-year graduation anniversary. So I graduated from Berkeley, go Bears, in 2011. Started out at Cal in 2007. But in order to really start my story, I feel like I need to take a step back before I even went to Cal. I am originally from San Diego, California. So for any of you Southern Californians, feel free to pop it into the chat. I left San Diego for two things. One, I was the oldest of five boys, and I felt like there was a lot that I wanted to successfully accomplish at a young age, knowing that I had gone through, honors programs, I was IB, all of that stuff. I wanted to make sure that I was setting myself up and really challenging myself on what can Joe do outside of the confines of San Diego and also my household. Um, so as a result, I ended up applying to a few places, ended up choosing Cal ultimately because, as much as I wanted to push myself to, step outside of my comfort zone, um, I felt like the San Francisco Bay Area and Berkeley was far enough where I wouldn't have to be at the reach of my mom as much as I love her. She is definitely one who will visit you on a weekly basis or on a weekend basis. Quote, my younger brother who went to UCSD, she was there all the time. And so almost like a live-in roommate. So I'm glad that I was far enough, but at least close enough where I was about an hour and a half flight away. Ended up coming to the San Francisco Bay Area, attended Cal, came in as a kind of pre-med track. And I was like, that's exactly what I want to do. There's never been a doctor in the family. I want to make sure that I am appealing to the dreams and expectations of my family. And like most narratives might happen here at Cal, I did switch my major a few times. Ended up moving from specifically pre-med to then doing more French language because that's something that I had studied in high school, and I knew that I wanted to continue to craft the language because I really enjoyed it. Fast track, I then ended up taking a few courses through my breadth requirements in ethnic studies and really fell in love with the craft itself. The discipline and I think the way in which they approach specific social constructs was really enticing to me because that is effectively what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I'll talk a little bit more about my career in a bit, but kind of tell you a bit, changing majors, something that happens naturally. I came into Cal thinking, okay, now that I have my ethnic studies and French double major, I want to, be a teacher. I ended up being a sub teacher during my last 2 years at Cal because I needed to make sure that I was bringing in a little bit of income, right? Through that experience, I realized that what I really enjoyed about specifically education was the direct kind of working with an individual based on their social, behavioral, and kind of mental health aspects. In that time, while I was teaching, the earthquake in Haiti happened. So I'm not sure if some of you are aware, but in 2009, 2010, and then also post, so 2011, earthquake in Haiti had happened, and as a result, there was a large refugee population that moved from Haiti over to the San Francisco Bay Area. A lot of them were reaching out for a lot of social service agencies. One of them was mental health services. The issue, though, is that a lot of mental health workers here in the community didn't know how to speak French. So what a lot of these nonprofits ended up doing is reaching out to a lot of French departments around the Bay Area. One of them was Berkeley. I got the email blast because I was part of the major DL and thought, hey, why not? Let's really support this community who's really enduring a lot in the moment. In that time, I started working closely with a mental health counselor at one of our local school sites, specifically working with a family that had moved over. And I really grew to love the craft of the mental health counselor and the therapist. And so I ended up joining that organization post-graduation. I joined Seneca Family of Agencies. It was a nonprofit mental health organization. I know that they're well connected with the Berkeley staff, especially on mental health services. I was working directly in mental health in educational settings. After about a year and a half of doing that, I got tapped on the shoulder by our HR director at the time asking, hey, we want to build out a recruitment team, people who understand the craft, who then want to invite others, and then also making sure that we're continuing our mission. Had never had a taste of HR. Was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, HR is the people that you go to when you're in trouble. Like, why would I want to be part of that team, right? There's a lot of the stereotype and preconceptions that people had. But I ended up joining the team and really kickstarting the HR recruitment umbrella for the organization, working closely with the HR director, really growing in love with HR because really that was a convergence of that social behavioral mental health aspect, really making sure that we're keeping that empathy at our core in business that I really enjoyed. Did that for a few years, hit a plateau, told myself, okay, what's my next play? My HR director told me at the time, Joe, if you really feel like this is something you want to do, I think that a structured business approach to understanding the business side of things would be important for you. Something that I hadn't really thought about, but I knew that I was a little bit uneasy about. Ended up pursuing my MBA, signed up for the University of San Francisco's MBA program because they focused on organizational development, mental health administration, and then also more importantly, data analysis, which is really what I wanted to challenge myself on. Fast forward in between my first and second year of my grad program, that's when I got exposed to SAP. They were trying to build out talent acquisition teams specifically focused on employee experience and candidate experience. So regardless of whether or not you get hired, how are people feeling about it? And long story short, I joined them as an intern, quickly moved into leading our intern program globally, because at the time there was a lot of insight that I was able and value that I was able to get from the nonprofit that I worked in, and then also my MBA that really was able to then bring me into that landscape. I did that for the last year and a half. And then in 2020, early 2020, pre-COVID, seems like so long ago, I ended up joining this team as a strategy and experience manager. So what that does day to day, just long story short, I focus on an internal initiatives that focus on professional development, employee engagement, and maximizing our product delivery within our region in California. So as a strategy and experience manager for SAP across the West Coast, I want to make sure that all of our internal initiatives are focused on key pillars that SAP drives, on top of making sure that we're maximizing professional development. For those of you who don't know what SAP is, we are a large tech software company. We provide business solutions for businesses out there to continue to deliver the products that we use day in and day out. So if you think about the transactions that happen on a daily basis through iOS or through the App Store, if you think about all of the business expenses when it comes to reimbursement that might happen at your site. So if any of you are part of student groups, when you have to be reimbursed by the university, you all use the Concur platform. Concur is an SAP product. So things of that sort. So that's what I'm doing now. So hopefully that was able to give you a little bit of nuggets that hopefully will spark some questions and inquiry. Wanted to kind of paint a big canvas so that you all have tons and tons of questions to ask outside of the ones that I think Heidi already has lined up. I'm an open book, so feel free to ask anything and all, personal and professional, of course, to a level. I'll let you know if I'm uncomfortable in answering the question, but I tend to be pretty open. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Joe, for sharing your career story and a bit about what you do. And that is a very common question that students ask. So thank you for going into what you're currently doing for SAP as well. Given all these experiences that you've had, what are the skills that employers are seeking? And in addition to that, how did being an LNS major help you develop skills?
Yeah, I think that if I were to bucket into three successful skills that I think that not only have I been able to hone in on, but also been able to then develop throughout my career. The first is adaptive and proactive thinking. And the reason why I say adaptive and proactive thinking is oftentimes people tell you, well, I want you to think critically. which is fantastic, right? It's always best to be able to deconstruct a concept, be able to deconstruct a project, maybe a success or a failure of the team, and then being able to then deliver. The adaptive and proactive is making sure that you are agile in changes if they come. So thinking about the what ifs. So what if this comes to my plate? So for example, what if our budget is cut in half? What if someone on my team decides to leave the organization? What if my manager, our senior executives say we're shifting course? You want to make sure that you're thinking proactively, those plans B's and C's before they even come. When I think about proactive thinking, something that I've enjoyed is I'm thinking to myself, okay, what's the next step? So say that they love this idea. So say at work, I might say, we want to make sure that we are expanding our recent grad community to Newport Beach. Awesome. If they love it, if they know that the research and data shows that we need to go to that new office, I'm already thinking to myself, okay, should they say yes? This is what my timeline looks like. So when I'm sitting at the table with them and they're like, hey, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. What are next steps? I don't have to then say, oh, I'll get back to you. Let me set up another call. I can then just pull up that plan and say, hey, I already thought about it. Winning moves, right? People are then growing from a point of, oh, Joe is in the room, metaphorically, to Joe has a seat at the table. I always think about those things. And I think that being able to be adaptive and proactive is something that I even built out when I was in my undergrad. Being part of CalServe, being part of GenEC, and making sure that the trainings that I was providing and the initiatives I was providing as a campaign manager, I needed to think proactively, right? Being part of GenEC and being a trainer in a specific workshop, I needed to think about the audience. What happens if these questions are asked? We got to make sure that we're thinking strategically to know how we're going to answer them. So that's probably one of the skills. Another skill that I think would be imperative that I won't shed too much detail into, but I know that some of you are perhaps thinking, how does this play into professional life, is professional empathy and perspective. Oftentimes when we're making decisions, especially in a corporate setting, there's this idea that, there are heartless decisions or non-empathic decisions. And so really being able to then influence, but then also make decision-making with empathy at core is something that's super, super important and that we're seeing a lot more of, that even businesses are wanting to then think more strategically at that with those goggles on. How will this ultimately affect this population? How will this ultimately impact our customer based on the product that we're building, right? Making sure that you have that level of empathy, essentially putting yourself in other people's shoes before you decide to move forward with an initiative. So those are probably two skill sets that I felt like naturally I had experience while I was at Cal that then translated over to the professional world.
Thanks for sharing, Joe. Kind of related to that, you've identified important skills and skills that you've developed at Cal.
Mm-hmm.
So what tips do you have for students in terms of communicating those skills in resumes, cover letters, and in the interview process?
Yeah, great question. So some of the advice, just to give you some context, part of my role as a strategy and experience manager is I lead a recent grad program called SAP Next Talent. I bring in 90 developers, designers, and data scientists to participate in 18 months in rotations after graduation. And that almost minimizes the buy it before you try it. A lot of times recent grads are like, oh, I don't know if I want to try this out long term. So our solution to that is, as a recent grad, we get you in, you're full time, you do 18 months, 3 different 6-month rotations. At the end of it, you get to choose one of those 3 to then work long term, right? The reason why I give you that context is because when it comes to resumes and cover letters, people have become a lot more creative in cover letters and then also in resumes that I wanted to share with you all that have been key successes in the folks that we hire on. First is hyperlinking companies that we're not aware of or that might not be industry knowledgeable or might not be industry specific. Some of you are pivoters, right? So you may have worked in nonprofit and then moved in education and then moved in tech, similar to my trajectory. Some of you may have tried out specific internships or fellowships from small startups or nonprofits that people don't know of. So being able to then hyperlink the name of the company into your resume is a key winning move, right? Because it allows me to then say, oh, this person looks like they have um, good skill sets and responsibilities that they've held. Now let me, what the heck is Seneca, right? So then they'd be able to click on it and then know of the company. So that's key winning move that easily any of you can embed into your resumes. Another thing that that's been proven successful is providing metrics or quants or level of impact. Oftentimes you all are able to be great storytellers, and these are the responsibilities I held, but then take it to the next level. From those responsibilities, what did you ultimately succeed? Were you able to then drive revenue? Were you able to then maximize impact? Were you able to lead this workshop from 100 to then 300 people? Were you able to scale out this specific initiative or solution to be adopted not only by your team, but maybe from your regional team or maybe from the entire company, right? Those things we want to see, how were you able to then bring impact to not only your development, but more importantly to the organization, right? It gets the employer an opportunity to say, not only are they invested in themselves and their development, which is important, but at the same time, these are the cultural adds or value adds that you can then bring to the organization. Specifically for those of you who are interested in tech, they always talk about that, the hobby subline. So a lot of times in cover letters and in resumes specifically, people might highlight some hobbies that they like to do as their bottom line or the last line of their resume. That helps in just providing the level of creativity or personal brand to who you are and what you like to do on the off time. Lastly, on the cover letter side, I know in this last go around of our 90 people in our program, there are about 4 or 5 of them who did video cover letters. So essentially they're just YouTube videos that they uploaded to tell a bit about them, right? So whether it's you showcasing your living room, a little bit about you, hey, this is my dog, I'm sorry he jumped on me, but I enjoy my dog, right? Things of that sort, to give a little bit of a personal twist to who you are, outside of maybe what has not been able to successfully get translated in a 2D like a resume. So those are probably some advice in resume and cover letters.
Any advice for the interview process, Joe?
Yes, interview process. Yes, please. So as far as interviews are concerned, a few things. One is know your environment. So if you are one who doesn't have doesn't have good lighting because you love the dark, I'm complete opposite. I love the light. The more windows I can open, the better. But making sure that you have good environment, making sure that you are able to have steady Wi-Fi connection, things of that sort, right? Like the logistical aspects of it. Two things that I love, or two things that I really enjoy about candidates is that one is being able to then have answers of some anticipated questions, right? They might want to ask you about your most recent role and what you were able to then achieve. Take me end to end a project that you really enjoy that you were able to work on in your most recent role. Tell me about a role or tell me about a project that didn't go as planned or that was a disaster and how you learned from it, right? Are you able to then learn quickly? Are you able to fail forward and fast and then move on and take away some learning lessons? So think about some of these anticipated questions and prompt them, right? Sometimes you'll see those people who may not have done a level of preparation into their interviews. You ask them these more formal questions that are pretty standard that a lot of companies use, and they're still taking the time to think about it. And being able to then jump quickly allows us to then get some of these out of the way so that we can really focus on some of the meaty ones that might attribute to some of your more professional engagements. And then also, I think a second thing to think about, have questions lined up. Oftentimes, interviewers will leave the last 5 to 10 minutes for the sheer fact of we're hoping that you can ask us questions. There's been countless interviews that I've sat in where I ask, all right, those are the questions that I have lined up. Wanted to give you time to ask questions for me. And all I hear is nothing now, just what next steps are. And it's just so, I guess, disappointing because as much of a good interview that I had with you, if you then come out with no questions for me at the end, I have declined individuals because they haven't asked me questions. There's no level of curiosity there, which is one of the biggest competencies I highlight in my interview process, and that other employers I'm sure also highlight. If you're able to ask questions, connecting, the reason why it's so important for you to ask questions, whether it's culture, whether it's their own opinion or experiences while they're there, the journey that they got there, how do they measure success in their own role. These are opportunities for you to then chime in or provide an additional dialogue with the person. If you ask them, hey, what is one important aspect of culture at SAP? And I would say, mine is the fact that I'm able to take ownership in creating community based on my own intersections and my own identity. And you're like, that's so interesting that you mentioned that. I'm actually part of the Gender Equity Resource Center. And one of the key trainings that they always talk about is the concept of intersectionality and why it's so important. We can't see individuals as just individual blockers, but I've been able to see how those connections ultimately impact socials, right? Or social norms, or that social well-being. Awesome, great connection, right? The more that you're able to then ask questions, the more you can then identify what are some moments that you can then become memorable, and ultimately, hopefully lead to a hire, at least an offer.
Joe, I saw in the chat box a very relevant question.
Yes.
Examples of questions to ask. I know you gave a good one, but a student was asking what are some good questions to ask?
Yes. So depending on the organization, I kind of break it up by a couple of things. So I break it up by organizational or institutional. So, from your vantage point, what is it like? What are cultural or values of the organization? Others that are more institutional can include like, I see that the mission of your organization is XYZ, right? How do you see this role fitting into that goal? Another institutional one might be, I see that your CEO was part of this specific interview or so-and-so, right? Like, how is that going to bring value to the organization? Or, I see that there's a long set of products that this organization provides for the general public. Which have been your favorite, or have you worked on any? That shifts into the more personal aspect. So the individual that you're talking to, what have you enjoyed about working there? But more importantly, like, rather than just like, what do you enjoy about your role? It's like, what have you found impactful in the role that you've held? Have you, navigated or pivoted in different roles while you were at the organization? So those are great examples from the more personal aspect. Sometimes you might get into more of the like logisticals of your interview process. So I would love to know what next steps are, or if, what is the timeline for this application process? Sometimes some interviews may know it, especially if their recruiters are part of the hiring team. Some of them might not. You want to not be focused so much on those, but more so on the other two. The reason why is because they might not ultimately be the decision makers, but at the same time, they can help influence the decision, especially if you were able to have good engagement. So in summary, breaking it up by institutional, organizational, based on your research, personal ones that highlight the other individual on the table, and then lastly, more recruitment logistical ones, which should probably be more of like 10% of it. 90% of it should be focused on the first two.
All right, thanks, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Given the pandemic, a lot of students have anxiety around the job search and internship search process. So what advice would you have for students to navigate looking for jobs and internships at this time?
Yeah, first things first, I feel it, right? I think that there is such an unprecedented moment right now in us identifying what the future of work looks like, and then also what does the future of employment look like. And I think that there has to be that level of distinction, especially for young folks like you all who are just getting into the game. And I think what's unnerving sometimes is that like, we don't then, us as employers, don't provide you with a straight answer, because each of us say, we don't know, or they might give you like total, like, extreme answers. And so a little bit of ownership, I think, comes back to us. But at the same time, I steer on the side of keeping it transparent and keeping it real, in the sense that like, this is what we're looking for. This is what we're hoping them to do. And this is the amount of numbers that we have. Back to your question on, what you should do to then help amplify that. In the job search, there's a couple of ways in which I think you can help understand industry. One of them, of course, is, using the platforms like LinkedIn, Indeed, Glassdoor to identify, okay, who is just throwing jobs out there. A second, more underbelly that I definitely suggest you do and look into is Following specific hashtags based on industry subjects. So for example, if you know you want to pivot into tech, you might want to follow the hashtag digital transformation, or you might want to, think about hashtag work from home, hashtag, telecommute. And the reason why is because some of these hashtags might be embedded based on specific companies that are looking at these things, that you will then say, okay, it trend, or I'm noticing a trend that this specific industry or this specific companies are actually still hiring. So I might want to look at those industries themselves, rather than on the flip side where by standard, right, you're so used to looking at a company site and then going to their jobs board, but you might be able to then jump ahead by being able to then connect with people on LinkedIn if you're able to then follow some of these trends that are currently impacting larger society, because companies are also in that conversation.
Thanks, Joe. Um, uh, we have virtual career fairs that we're offering, but a lot of students feel very apprehensive about the process. Um, how can how can students make the most out of virtual career fairs? And what advice would you have in regards to like an elevator pitch or an introduction to an employer at a virtual career fair?
Um, elevator pitches and career fairs are daunting. I'm going to ask you all to do something real fast. In one word, tell me what your feeling was in your most recent virtual career fair or virtual networking event. Write it in the chat. I would just love to know, and be honest. For example, my last one, it was awkward like as heck. And the reason why is because one, the platform wasn't working. Two, the video wasn't working. It was going on and off. People were like giving me their long stories, knowing that we only have 5 minutes, right? Like it was, yeah, anxious, awkward. It was so sad. I get it. Panicking, yes, sweaty, dread, terrifying. I'm living for all these words. It is very much the same. Yep, uncomfortable, right? And it's not only you all coming into these. As employers, we're also like, oh, this is a whole new pioneer. This is a whole new like lay of the land I have never experienced before. And so for a lot of us, these are the same emotions coming in or even coming out of it. Now, in order to really maximize that, what I've encouraged individuals to do is really focus on your professional pitch as a story. Give me a story, start with a bang, give me some meat, end with an action. And so essentially following this three-step process of answering these three questions. And these three questions can be answered in a 30-second to even a 3-minute conversation. It's the who the heck are you? What are you doing? And then where are you going? But I like to keep the end one of like, what do you want? Like, what are you ultimately connecting with me for? And so if you give me a quick snippet of who you are, right? My name is Joham. I'm currently the strategy and experience manager at SAP. Super excited to be here meeting with you. What are you doing? I'm currently focused on employee engagement, retention initiatives, and professional development within SAP, because we know that aligns to what our 2023 goals are in getting into the digital transformation age. What do I want? I'm here because I want to meet with you and I want to connect with other industry professionals so that we can share best practices on how we can move this forward together. Done, right? Awesome, let's follow up, right? Being able to then jump and own your story, they don't know what they don't know. So even if you happen to make a mistake, I won't know that unless your face or unless you tell me, oh, actually, I'm sorry, can I start over? There's been countless times where people have said, I'm sorry, can I just start over? Or, oh, I know that was so bad, or contextualize it. And the more transparency you provide, sometimes it can bite you back, right? Like it will, like, if you would have told me that, I could have thought that was a perfect pitch. And if you would have finished it with, oh my gosh, I was so bad at it, I then start thinking to myself, oh wait, did they? Like, I thought it was pretty good. So making sure that you kind of craft that pitch, and more importantly, answer those three questions. So who you are, what are you doing, and what do you want? Also, something that especially in the virtual age that I've noticed is you making sure that you have a moment of memorability. I love the end where people will then say, thank you so much for connecting with me. I feel like, a lot of your subject or professional expertise is definitely beneficial. I think that my professional expertise, I want to make sure that I'm elevating my professional expertise as well. But also on the flip side, we got to make sure that we're also taking care of ourselves. On my free time, I love to cook. I am, I actually have an associate's in culinary arts and I still like to practice it now. And I think the reason why I enjoy it so much is because I'm able to take a whole bunch of ingredients and then create something out of it, similar to a lot of my program management and project management on professional side. I like taking a lot of different factors, a lot of different resources to then make sure that we're making a level of perfection, or at least trying to achieve it through our program scalability, our program initiatives, right? Being able to then have that level of memorability, like, oh, you're a cook, I love to eat, like what type of thing, like what's the last thing that you cooked? And it's like, oh, you know what, I've really been trying to explore fusion, right? So the last thing that I wanted to make were like Filipino tacos, right? But then using cauliflower as like my grain. And so being able to then have that level of engagement entices them in. And then also, most important, especially for virtual career fairs, that art of the follow-up, you can talk about those things. You can qualify with, thank you so much for meeting with me. I know you met a lot of people. I was the one who really enjoys cooking and we were talking about fusion. It's like, oh, that's right. I remember talking to Heidi about that. That's so cool. Like, yeah, let's follow up. Let's have coffee. Or if you need anything, let me know. I am more employers, I mean, I can't make a blanket statement, but most folks, just by natural social behavioral theory, like most folks will be able to then give a little if they have a level of, oh, this person enjoys what I'm doing and they were able to get something out of it, right? And I think that will be important for you all as you go into your virtual fairs, is that answering those three questions. And then lastly, having a moment of memorability. Why? Because if not, you'll just be another number in and out that they were able to then engage with.
Thanks, Joe. The next question, this is the next to last question I'll be asking you, is about networking. Students come and they're so nervous about networking. They don't know how to get started and they don't know how to then maintain and cultivate the relationships that they're building. So what recommendations do you have around networking, community building?
Mm-hmm. Practice, practice, practice. If anything, with the people in this room, if anything, with Heidi and the career services staff, making sure you're practicing. The more you practice, the more comfortable you'll be with it. I am still trying to perfect my professional pitch, even though I've been using it for like 15 years. But the fact is, there's always a different. I see the professional pitch and I also see networking as a recipe. Again, I love to cook actually on the personal side. Like, side note, I love to cook. So I'm always using analogies and metaphors when it comes to cooking. A recipe for success is for you to have a large ingredient list, and then being able to then pick and choose from those ingredients to then craft based on your audience. Metaphorically, that'll happen for you all. Have different bits and pieces in your professional and also personal life that you know are standouts that make you who you are at your core, and then pick and choose based on who your audience is. When I'm sitting in a boardroom for our Out for Undergrad, for the Out for Undergrad conference, the ingredients I'm pulling there in my personal life is very different than the ones that I'm pulling in my conversations with you all. Why? Because I know that there are specific takeaways that are valuable for you all out of out of those ingredients versus the insight that I might be able to provide as being part of that board. I say it to say, understanding that you are a larger collection of these of ingredients, but then knowing when to pick specific ones will be winning opportunities for you. The last thing you want is to throw them all into a bucket and think that it's going to work. It's not going to taste good, right? And so making sure that you have that connection to who you are and being able to then identify those moments. When it comes to networking, and I've touched on this a little bit, is that follow-up. Consistency is key. People are busy, especially now with COVID. People are having to navigate both their personal and professional lives. Oftentimes you might be, scared to follow up a second time or maybe even a third time. Sometimes people just need that reminder, right? Like, hey, just following up again. I know things are probably busy towards the end of the week. Just wanted to follow up again to see if we can connect, right? Being able to have that moment to for the individual to say, yes, I need to reach out to that person again. Who knows? They may have read it. They may have come with the intention of, yes, I'm going to respond to them. And then a fire could have started, or their dog could have ran out the room and then they left, right? And next thing you know, they forget about the moment of them responding to you. So making sure that you have that ownership. I think one of the things that I always tell young folks is have the courage to drive and take the lead in these relationships. Don't think that because someone has 10, 15, or even 5 years of experience above you means that they have to own it because they have more experience. No, we are there to provide you with the guidance and perhaps a roadmap of some sort. But it's for you to then tell us what is it that you need from us, right? It's not for me to then have to like, figure it out in some session with you. I wish I was a mind reader, but I'm not. And so for you to then be able to verbalize and effectively communicate that to me, the more beneficial it will be.
All right, thanks, Joe. The last question I have is something that comes up when students have applied for many opportunities, but they experience rejection and they don't get what they want. So what advice would you have for students who are just feeling discouraged with the job search process after being rejected?
Yeah. I'm going to have you all participate in another chat storm. So, in one word, tell me what your feeling was when you had that rejection. And don't just say rejection or don't just say sad. Come on, be creative, y'all. Y'all are bears. Let's do this. Mad, yes. Ooh, another 3-letter. Good word. Unqualified, yeah. What are some other ones? Depressed, disappointed, frustrated. I can only imagine now, especially with a lot of companies kind of shifting gears or having to revisit what their people strategy is, right? Are they thinking of growing? Are they thinking of staying the same? Um, when it comes to, and the reason why I asked you to participate in that is because first things first, you have to let that feeling out, right? The fact that you're able to share your feeling in the moment is great. Do not bottle it up. Do not swallow it. I come from mental health. That is the worst thing that you can do, right? And so if anything, I won't charge you all for this mental health session, but making sure that you're kind of verbalizing it out there in the world is what's most important, at least for now, right? Because I am validating this, that I have felt the same. I even feel the same now. When you're in the professional realm, you might be pitching ideas that you're really passionate about. You might be saying, this is the best thing since sliced bread. You all need to adopt this project. And then they're like, no, we don't have the feasibility. No, we don't have the budget, right? So similar feelings might come that way. Some ways in which I've tried to navigate that is, one is thinking, okay, what's plan B? Again, back to those skill sets of that proactive thinking. Okay, should they say no? Can I follow up with the recruiter for feedback? Can I perhaps follow up with the recruiter and, hey, can we stay connected on LinkedIn? Although I know that this wasn't the right fit for me, if future roles come up, I would love to connect with you again to see how we can explore how I'm best qualified, right? So that's a great opportunity. For those that are like more like cold, like you never heard from anybody, you just threw your application in and they said no, there might be a couple of factors that you might need to take into consideration. One, is it a fairly popular organization? LinkedIn allows you the chance to see how many applicants from the LinkedIn site then moved into the application, right? So if you see that there's 1,000 people who review the role, well, that means that you're then stacked up against 1,000 people, right? There might be a level of validation or a level of assurance that, hey, this may have been a popular position in the meantime. Another thing that I like to do, especially when it comes to levels of discouragement in the rejection process, I shared this before with Heidi, but I have a failure and also it's now a rejection book where for moments when I feel like I've messed up in the professional realm, or I feel like I've had moments of rejection, I like to write it down on this rejection book. And I actually revisit it later on. And I think to myself, wow, Joe, like you were really down in the outs, or you're really deep in your negative feels in that moment when you got rejected for this specific thing. But look at where you're at now, right? It's a level of reflection that allows me to then think back, hey, they may have said no. Hey, I may have gotten a C or a D or may have failed that course, failed that midterm. But look at where I'm at now. Like it didn't keep me from then pursuing ultimately what my happiness is now. And it's allowed me to then think about, although I may have had a trajectory or a roadmap in that time that was pretty finite, I had to adapt in those moments to then make sure that I was acclimating to still get to my end results, but I was still able to get there, right? And